Hello and welcome to Open Banking Aotearoa online event. Thank you very much for joining us. My name's Phil Cass, I'm the API Centre Manager. The API Centre is a business unit of Payments New Zealand and we're leading Aotearoa Open Banking. I'd like to thank our sponsor, EY, for sponsoring this session. I'm going to be taking you all on a journey of the API Centre so far. And then I'm going to be passing over to our panel of experts to talk about the future of open banking in Aotearoa. Along the way, if you've got any questions for the panel, you can ask this through the panel platform in the Q&A feature. So, the start of open banking. Well, a lot of people ask me, what is open banking? Open banking is many different things to many people. Things as simple as sharing your data through consent securely to get a loan, to get a better product, to get a mortgage. Things like using a digital wallet, things like making it easier to top up your digital wallet. Electronic billing, presenting instant payments to enable businesses to reduce their debtor times, to enable cash flow. And during payment consent, allowing somebody to drive down a motorway going through a toll road, and if it's under $5 for the toll, then it's automatically paid. If it's over $5, then you'll get a buzz through your banking app to let you know whether you want to pay it or not, whether to accept it. So these are all really great things. We've got awesome fintechs in New Zealand, and there's going to be more and more products and opportunities through open banking. But there's also vulnerable people. The most vulnerable people in our society, there's opportunity to really help them as well. And I'd just like to take an opportunity to share a personal story around where open banking could really help in the future. And unfortunately, I have too many of these as well, which come to mind. But and particularly, I'll use the example of, not the real name, New Zealand's a small country, but Sally lives just north of Auckland, and she's on a low income. She's has 3 kids, and really runs a tight ship with her budget. And a few months ago, her youngest son became ill and had to go into hospital, and then had to be taken to hospital 3 days a week. That was about $200 in petrol a week, which wasn't budgeted for. So Sally actually had to make the decision, do I feed my children or do I take my child to hospital? That is something that no parent should ever have to make a decision like that. So open banking is an opportunity where Sally could actually contact a government support service in the future. The government support service could send her a link via her phone number where she can consent to have her ID authenticated through her bank, and also her data shared for her bank account. And this could be done instantly. So this technology is now available with our standards at the moment and is there ready to go and can be built upon. The government agency who's supporting could then take a look and say, yes, we can see you've had to spend $200 this week, and let me just load this $200. We know we're talking to Sally, and you've got $200 in your account now to go and feed your family. That's a really powerful use case, and it doesn't stop there with open data either. You own your banking data, you own your financial data, you own your utility data. You also own your medical data. So in the future, Sally could consent to share the medical data of her child with the agency's support, and they can see, okay, you've got 10 weeks. I can see here a doctor note that this is going to be 10 weeks of trips to the hospital, and so we'll put in $200 every week for the next 10 weeks, and you don't need to contact us again to asking for help. These are things that open banking can do for New Zealand. And I think we actually have open banking in New Zealand now, and we're on the journey now. We've made steps within New Zealand. We've got our version 1 of the standards which were developed in 2019, and we've continued to build on those standards. In April 2019, the API Centre was born and is focused on delivery of open banking in Aotearoa. Currently, our membership, we have 18 API providers, so that's our five largest banks are included in that. We have 17 third parties, and we have 170 community contributors, which is our free membership. The API Centre is governed by the Board of Payments New Zealand. However, the board delegates responsibilities to the API Council. The API Council is made up of 6 API providers, 6 third parties and 3 independents with a MBIE observer. We also have, in the API Centre, we have a business working group that sits below the council. This develops requirements, identifies the best operational practice through guidelines, T's and C's, standards and usage policies, also consent flows. Business working groups also tasked with delivering expectations around things like performance and monitoring and customer experience. We also have the technical working group that sits alongside the business working group, which develops the standards, and we have world-class standards and we continue to develop those. We also have other ad hoc working groups, such as a partnering working group, and I'll come to that later. So our standards development is obviously it's the core of open banking in Aotearoa. Standards have been based on the UK standards and we've Kiwified them. Version 1, as I said, was a baseline for account information payments initiation, and based on version 2 of the UK standards. There was quite a bit of optionality in there, and so going forward we've tried to reduce that optionality. Version 2 of the standards saw a major technical upgrade, a new security profile, and the introduction of decoupled flow and customer authentication and enduring payment consent. Version 2.1 extended that and clarified the types of accounts and functionality and included credit cards. Version 2.2 made more account information functionality mandatory and decoupled flow mandatory. And version 2.3 of our standards we were currently at, enduring payments consent is mandatory as well. All our standards are open source and available on the API Centre website. All standards are also available on our Sandbox, which is powered by Middleware New Zealand, and community contributors, which is our free membership, are able to sign up on our website and use the Sandbox for testing. But API Centre is so much more than standards. We also have customers at the forefront of everything we do. We have extensive customer experience guidelines, which also includes the consent. There's a lot tremendous industry benefits as well. We've set the roadmap for standards and the future developments with wide-ranging consultation. We're now actually going back to review lessons learned and reviewing what's going to be further on our standards pipeline and development in the futures. We're always going backwards and looking for lessons learned so we can improve. Our working groups are pivotal to an industry, enabling the industry to collaborate, ensuring outcomes are fit for purpose. We have had over 100,000 hours of people's time and over 5 years of working groups in the API Centre to get to the point we are now, to create the building blocks that we have. We also have a number of tools and systems that are available through the API Centre. We've developed partnering resources through our partnering working group. We've developed a due diligence template. That due diligence template will enable third parties to understand what the capabilities they need to have in order to be able to partner with API providers. We expect that the due diligence template is 70 to 80% of the requirements, and then that final 20 to 30% will need to be negotiated. Things like commercials and things like liability, which need to be negotiated individually, are left open. We have a template bilateral agreement with all the key areas of a template of an agreement that you would expect within a bilateral agreement to make it easier and allow third parties information and support around documentation and what's done in the due diligence and bilateral. We have a web portal which is going to be up in about 2 weeks' time to share the due diligence information. So a third party can store all of their due diligence information in one place, and when they're speaking to an API provider, they can simply give them access rather than taking it around all the different API providers and sharing different information. We also, as I mentioned earlier, we've got our sandbox powered by Middleware New Zealand, with all the current standards, and it's updated each time when new standards are developed. The API register is the cornerstone of an open banking ecosystem. It's a trust centre to store public keys in server locations. We have that set up, it's ready to go, and we continue to maintain it and ready for use. Rules and regulation are also a big part of the API Centre. Continuous updates and review of our standards security profile, and also always continuing to review our terms and conditions to make sure that they're fit for purpose. We still have work to do in the future though, and we still have a long pipeline of things that we need to do, but we've got the building blocks now, and it's going deeper and just developing those building blocks. We're excited by the Minister's announcement today around banking going first, being first cab off the rank for CDR, and we look forward to hearing more information around that. Number one, our focus for the coming year is API provider implementation plan. That's really important to us. The API provider implementation plan binds API providers to delivery dates through the T's and C's. We've just started the consultancy phase of that, working with API providers and our working group to identify dates where API providers will be required to deliver APIs. And it's also the full suite as well for API delivery. It's technically ready, it's operationally ready, and it's also ready to form bilateral agreements. So we're looking forward to working with regulators to develop it further on the open banking building blocks that we have in delivering CDR. We're working closely with the regulators. We're really keen to help guide the future of CDR and open banking in New Zealand. But some other things as well that we have in the development and very close to completion is finalising our proof of concept framework. That proof of concept framework streamlines bilateral arrangements with API providers for third parties and community contributors. It also streamlines the terms and conditions from the API Centre to make it easier to test and do live proving with a small sample of live customers. We also are working hard to grow our membership and educate the customers. We also have our standards development, which is always ongoing. Version 3 is in the pipeline at the moment with two-way notifications and multi-authorisation for account information is being developed. We're continuing to update our guidelines and also a focus and a deeper dive on reviewing consent. So we really would love to share all the information that we have. So on our website, apicentre.paymentsnewzealand.co.nz, please go there, have a look. The third-party membership is available, free community contributor membership. If you want to talk to anybody at the API Centre, please contact us. Somebody will be in touch with you and we can share further information. So now, moving to our panel. So it's really exciting to have a panel of our experts today with from the API Centre community sitting with us, talking about what's the next generation of open banking in Aotearoa, what the country can learn from overseas jurisdictions and their thoughts on the future and the complexities of the evolving regulatory landscape, particularly given the information that we've received today. So I'd like to introduce the panel. So we have Terese Tunnicliffe, who has over 25 years experience in payments industry. In the past 8 years, she's worked on government and advisory roles across young business, bringing new digital opportunities to the market. She's also the independent chair of the API Council. We've got Daniell, CEO of Akahu, which provides open finance infrastructure for Aotearoa, New Zealand, and facilitates open banking payments. He previously co-founded Snowball Effect and worked at WeWork in Balgully. And we have Tina Groark. I must say happy birthday too for yesterday, and thank you Tina for spending your birthday with us. We feel privileged. And Tina is an open banking specialist for Blueware, part of the Middleware group of companies. She has a diverse background in business and technology with over 20 years experience both locally and internationally across a variety of sectors. And finally, on the panel, we also have Jody Bullen, who is Head of Open Banking at ANZ New Zealand. He's an active member of the API Centre and is on the Executive Council of the Digital Identity of New Zealand. He has over 20 years experience across multiple complex change and customer initiatives. And then facilitating our panel, it's great to have Mike Booth, who is the Associate Partner of EY, leading the company's consumer data right capability in Oceania. And thank you for flying in from Sydney to be here, Mike.
Thank you, Phil. Fantastic to be here. Kia ora, everyone. It's really interesting. So Minister Clark saved his announcement for us and for this panel here today. So for those that might have missed that this morning, a couple of things in this morning's announcement. So he said, open banking ensures that banks must share customer information if they request it, making it easier for New Zealanders to compare mortgage rates, apply for loans and switch banks. He said, under open banking, if somebody wanted to refix their mortgage at a lower interest rate, they could ask their bank to securely share their transaction information with a competitor and instruct them to share that specific data with an advisor of their choices. And on the other side of that was that businesses and services wishing to receive the data must meet a number of safeguards. And finally, in announcing that banking will be the first sector for CDR in Aotearoa, which is fantastic news as well. So turning to the panel then with fresh off the press. So Josh, maybe you could respond. So what are you most excited about, and what do you think we need to do to get right for CDR in the area?
So I think CDR or open banking is all about unlocking value for consumers. So the comments that Minister Clark that made this morning around being able to compare and switch products and make it easier to apply for a loan, those kind of examples are what we are trying to do. So in my mind, the thing that's most exciting is the products, because all of this infrastructure that we're all involved on this panel in building and preparing and coordinating on, what we're trying to do is set the foundations for people to build products that unlock value for consumers. So when we look in the New Zealand landscape at what's available right now, I think a lot of people are familiar with how Xero works, where you connect in your transaction data, and people do that because they get value out of connecting their bank account to Xero. Same with Pocketsmith. If you want to see an aggregated view of your financial life, you can connect your financial accounts to an app like that and make it easier to manage. So there are examples in New Zealand already, and I'm hoping that this regulation adds a tailwind so that we accelerate the uptake of these products and incentivize more people to build on top of these foundations that we're all involved in building.
Beautiful, fantastic. So some great examples and some acceleration from the regulations. So Jody, as the other side of that transaction from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, when I look at the opportunity around open banking, I'm excited about that opportunity. I'm excited because it provides new ways in which we can all work together. And Phil talked about how we've been working together to build the foundation of this ecosystem. And I didn't realise it was 100,000 hours, Phil, but I was just thinking how many of those I might have put in. But yeah, there's been a lot of work done to try and create this ecosystem. And I'm super excited, one, around how we're working together already, but how we continue to work together to create really meaningful and impactful change for New Zealanders. And that's super exciting, creating customer journeys and experiences that we just simply couldn't do on our own. And there's some great examples of those already starting to happen. I think there's, whatever we can do to accelerate that has got to be a good thing. Phil talked about the proof of concept framework that we've done as a working group. That really is quite innovative in its own, and learn from overseas to build that, to try and build that partnering and the ability to work together. So yeah, these new propositions that couldn't exist otherwise. And it's very easy to get focused on financial data only, but consumer data right is a broad economy right to your data. And so that means we're not just talking about value propositions and services that can be created on financial data. Yes, we're going to start there, but can also include your utilities data or your mobile bill. And some of those use cases are probably a bit unknown at the moment, but I think there's some real value there. So yeah, moving us forward in terms of helping customers become digital, supporting the digital economy, and creating these new things that we just probably can't foresee some of them just yet. Yeah. Super exciting.
And Tina, what are you most excited about?
Oh, I think open banking is going to change the way New Zealand operates, honestly. We talk about finance and we talk about mobile phone, but we don't talk about all of the information that is embedded in your transaction history. We know where you shop. The banks know where you shop. They know how much money you have to spend. They know where you eat. They know lots of things about you. The same as, when you have a Fitbit, they get all sorts of information about your exercise. Financial transactions give you all sorts of information about what you do. And you combine that with sustainability. You combine that with nutrition and diet. You combine that with health. You could, provide all sorts of advice and guidance to improve the well-being of New Zealand. And I think those are the types of innovative products we're likely to see on the back of something like open banking.
Beautiful, fantastic, thank you. Maybe staying with you, Tina, in terms of other jurisdictions, obviously there's commonalities, there's work that's happened in New Zealand and obviously other jurisdictions that have done open banking and Australia similarly doing CDR and multi-jurisdictional. Interested in your views in what we can learn from some of those other jurisdictions.
We have a lot to learn from Australia because they've just gone through the beginnings of their consumer data right, and there were lots of teething problems there. So hopefully we'll take those learnings. Some of the key ones that I see is their ecosystem is very closed, so it's very difficult for the innovators to get into the ecosystem, which is one of the reasons why we put that proof of concept framework in place with the API Council and the API Center, so that these small players can get into the market. Whereas in Australia, those small players are having to be sponsored by bigger players who are able to get into the ecosystem. I think also right-sizing it. The legislation in Australia is very comprehensive and very deep. I'm not sure that level of regulation is required in New Zealand. We have an industry-led initiative here, and we're making huge progress, slow, but huge, in the sense that we're gaining momentum, and 100,000 hours is not an insignificant amount of effort. And there's a lot of goodwill equity that's on the way, and banks are engaging and with the implementation powers. So I'd like to see some right-sizing instead of overreaching that we've seen in the jurisdictions like Australia and a little bit in the UK.
Right-sizing and leveraging. Jody, your thoughts on the extent to which we can learn from other jurisdictions?
I guess firstly, it's going to call out that this is really complicated. Like there's no jurisdiction overseas that in my view you could look at and go, that's the gold standard we should follow. Like every jurisdiction's approached it slightly differently, and they've found different challenges in the way they've approached it. So and we could go on for a whole session just on that. So I'm not going to get into it, but if you look at someone like Brazil, they've rolled out effectively a copy of the UK, but that's the UK model 4 years on, from live and 5 years after they started talking about it. So these things do take the concept of customers own their data and the balance between how much control and protection you give customers and the duty of care is a really complicated topic. And so again, not the place to talk about that, but it's hard. I think probably to your question around learning, I'd like to stress that we've learnt already. Like we've actively as an industry looked at those learnings from the technical standards that we've built already, around the consent models that we've started to put guidelines around how we think about accreditation and proof of concepts, which no other jurisdiction have got like a proof of concept kind of framework in place. So I think we've learnt already. I think there's a lot of learning, and I think I'd like us to continue to acknowledge that there are models we can look at. Let's learn from those, continue to bring them in. And recognise that we do have an opportunity to do things slightly differently. And in fact, we already are, by the fact that we've been in a room as an industry with fintech, startups, major tech and banks talking, about this and developing it together. So I think lots to continue to learn, but lots of learnings already that we've already applied.
Yeah, fantastic. Great points. For those watching, feel free to keep asking questions. We'll come to those as we go through the session. Just looking to some of the other areas, so action initiation. that's an area that obviously payments is in the UK. Action initiation as a wider concept and multi-industry is coming into Australia. It's also slated for New Zealand as well. So, Josh, just interested in your thoughts on sort of action initiation more generally.
Sure thing. So I think it's critical to have action initiation, aka payments, included in CDR. And the reason I say that is that every single one of our customers that uses open banking payments also uses data in some way, even if that's just to check the balance before initiating the payment, so you don't push someone into overdraft or dishonor fees. So any payment use case that we support involves data to some extent. So from a consumer's perspective, we would like to see that be able to be wrapped up in the same consent, so that as you are saying to whatever app it may be, I give you this access to my bank account, that consent covers whatever access to data is appropriate and whatever payment initiation is appropriate as well. And building on this last question around what we can learn from overseas, in Australia you have a bit of a confusing situation where CDR only covers data at the moment, and it's not clear how an action initiation consent is going to be able to work with other payment initiation systems in Australia. So we want to avoid that complexity. We want to avoid a consumer doing two different consent journeys for what is the same overall consent to an app. So yeah, critical that it's in, and we have to do it in a way that's seamless and understandable for consumers.
Yeah. Hot topic in Australia, that very one with our new payments platform as well, and Pay2 and various other things. So Jody, your thoughts?
I think probably just for those that aren't as close as we are, right now the industry is looking at what are called two services, one which is payment initiation. So, I guess as far as the scope of the industry is already concerned, action orientated is already being worked on. And ANZ is actually currently in pilot with our first open banking payment service with a merchant as we speak. So there's some really good progress being made in this area. So payments initiation and there's complexity in a right. So we call that one a right or an action model. Again, we've already faced into that to some degree. There's more to do. Like payments is a complicated space, but again, we're doing that together. And then on the other side is data sharing, which is your read model, which is Australia. So I think we've because we sort of, as Phil mentioned, the history of New Zealand's journey is sort of from the UK rather than from Australia. We are actively working on both action or right and data at this stage, and as we progress, I think it's on the industry and working group to work out, well, okay, if we're going to continue to do these action initiated, what's the next valuable thing we should be working on?
Yeah. And Tina, benefits and challenges around action initiation?
I could sit here and speak on that for hours, but I think we've seen evidence here in New Zealand that, with the use at the sandbox, that action initiation, payments, is the killer app, right? Everybody wants a payment, and they want to bring the data along with it. But what I think in New Zealand, we need more actions, not just payment. We need the ability to open bank accounts. When you look at these financial advisory fintech services that are likely to be built on top of open banking, they're going to give them advice to do something. We need the ability for them to do it through open banking. And making a payment is just one slice of that. And so I imagine over time we'll see more action initiation coming. But it's fantastic that we tackled payments first. And we've got, single domestic payments, and we've got enduring payments for subscription models here. And, and that's fantastic that we've been able to do that. We're the only jurisdiction, I believe, that has the enduring payment model in place. So with CDR, hopefully we'll get action initiation from day one.
Fantastic, excellent, thank you. So we've talked a little bit around the time to reach sort of broad adoption. So UK took a reasonable amount of time to get the standards in and the ecosystem built. Australia, perhaps a little less time. Brazil, very little time at all. And this morning, the MBIE talked about the exposure draft going into consultation next year, which is obviously the beginning of the kind of the legislative process to the journey to that to be regulated. So I guess what's going to be required to get to value and in a rapid way over here, Josh, do you think?
there's a lot of data sharing that goes on already. And in my mind, to move to these regulated systems, the regulated systems have to be better. And I think that's a key learning from Australia, where you have two regimes running in parallel. You have the regulated pipes and unregulated pipes. And what we've seen is that apps are reluctant to move across the regulated pipes until they're better. And better encapsulates, are they feature complete? What is the cost? Tina mentioned, accreditation processes. How hard is it to participate in those regimes? So better encompasses all of those things, insurance requirements, security requirements, etc. So I think there's a key thing we can learn from markets that are actually unregulated but have high uptake of open finance products. And the US is one of those markets where, through one of the intermediaries alone, 1 in 4 US adults have connected a bank account to another product. And I think we've got to get that balance right between regulations actually providing a tailwind and helping give consumers comfort about doing this, but not overcooking them so that they are stifling. And I think this speaks to the point Tina was making about right-sizing them. So, we've just got to make sure we get that balance right.
Jody, right-sized regulations for faster adoption?
I just want to put some facts out there, because we talk about the UK, and it is a pioneering model, right? But it's taken many, many years. And even today, they've still only reached about 6 million, 7 million customers using the service, right? Less than 10% of the population. Yeah. So when you go back to what does success mean, I'd like New Zealand to think about how could we get to 40, 50%, quickly. But I think also we need to be really conscious of why it's taken that long, and we're learning from some of those. But some of those are going to be out for, like this customer education. That was one of the big areas in the UK. Didn't invest in it. It came later, and all the awareness around that to understand what it is. There's a big reluctance for consumers to share data. Historically, I think New Zealand's one of the lowest sort of appetite for sharing data, and we haven't had a huge amount of fintech, in New Zealand, like some of the China and likes that have been predominantly fintech. So while there's some technical side of it, and operationally, you've still got an adoption consumer side, and so that for me is around how we're going to see value. What are those really key valuable propositions that are going to have material impact to customers that are going to be used and valued? And yesterday there was a conversation around all this, I think at the conference, and I was reflecting on it after. I said, there's all this technology here that's today, and it's not. We can do all this stuff today, but it's not being used, and so that's just technology looking for a problem, and there's not enough stronger value proposition. And so we need to work really hard around the value proposition. And what's hard about this is you've got lots of different parties involved, and to Josh's point. And so how do we get that right? So I think we do need to continue to work together, across industry, regulatory, in each other, and we need to work for those problems and try and find out where can we get the most value in the right-sized way. Lastly, yesterday was a big theme on trust.
Yeah.
And I was at a conference a couple of months ago, and one of the speakers talked about things will move at the speed of trust, and I think that goes back to the education, the relationships, and I think we're probably starting in a good place, with the collaborations that are happening, and we need to continue some of that.
It's interesting, but Brazil's always an interesting one. So that got to 6 million in about 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting lessons there, and I think often when they're asked what was successful, it was the technology and the plumbing and getting that in is obviously always a challenge, but it was some of those other things of the use cases and the collective will of the ecosystem to go do that, as well as the protections that go in.
And a much bigger population.
That does help, yeah. We need to look at the percentage. My mental arithmetic isn't good enough to do that.
But not taking away from Brazil, certainly made some good progress, and probably the one that I'm looking at the moment and going, what did they do? What did they learn?
Yeah, agreed. And from a technical challenges perspective, Tina, any thoughts on those sorts of things?
Well, we have, a digital equity and inclusion problem in New Zealand that needs to be addressed. And, there's the one side of the argument that open banking will address that and will help and bring more digital inclusion. But there's the other side of that. If they don't actually have access, they can't be digitally included. So I'm not quite sure which is the chicken and which is the egg, if I'm honest, but we need to address that somehow, and in New Zealand, and just internet access in general, and making sure that internet access is equitable.
That's a good point, yeah. And Jody, any thoughts on making it fair and included for all?
think we've talked about working together, but we've got to make sure we've got the centre at the heart of that, right? And that comes in, we were talking around the governance part of that as well, and what rules and obligations are in place around making sure that people are obligated. You know, we have an opportunity to design the ecosystem for inclusion, and what that means. But yeah, it's about making sure that we as an industry collectively need to work out how do we create a sustainable, trusted ecosystem, and do that in a way that can be inclusive. But that means that we all need to take that customer-centric view. It can't be based on different interests, or like, it really needs to be centered around the customer to make sure that design is in there. And so I guess the challenge for us is how do we continue to make sure that the customer view is represented in our design processes, and not just, you know, the fintechs that are representing those customers. And so consent processes, for example, are really important, you know, for example, you know. So how do we bring in design processes that truly have been designed from a consumer perspective, not from necessarily what API providers or fintechs think a good consent process should look like.
Yeah. Josh, any thoughts from you?
Well, back on the question around, you know, what do we need technically in New Zealand, or where are we placed? I think, you know, we're actually in a really good place because we have a high banked population and we have high levels of smartphone ownership. So the fundamentals are there to build interesting products. So I agree with that point around, you know, this is going to move at the speed of trust. So we need to build great products that unlock value for consumers, and that's what will move it. I would just say on education, I have kind of a different view from perhaps what might be shared on this panel, which is that I don't think general education campaigns will be very effective. I think the education has to be around the time of looking at a product, because otherwise it just doesn't really hit home for people, is what we've found. But if someone is considering using a product and they're trying to understand the value prop for connecting their bank account to that product, what it unlocks for them, in my mind, that's where we've really got to focus and make sure that consumers can make informed decisions. But if you try to do that education generally without a product in mind, what we find is it doesn't really hit home for people.
So within the consent flow itself, within the action that they're taking, be it a data share or a payment, sort of educate through that process and inform through that process.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I guess there's a bit of the how, right? Because ultimately we're doing customer education, and I guess part of that is consistency of message, understanding around what it means for them as part of that truly informed about disclosure. And so just certainly don't disagree. But it's about how do we design that so that the customer experience is optimal, knowing that as an ecosystem, you know, we're sort of all in it together in that respect. But, you know, actually it also needs to be viewed as one ecosystem at the same time but each individual value propositions and people. Yeah.
And our research that we did with fintech shows that, I can't remember the figures, but we saw, you know, when we asked the question first, would you be willing to share your financial information? Preponderance of people said no way. But as soon as you said, well, if you did that, you could get a cheaper insurance policy. Oh, well, maybe I will. Yeah. Oh, if you did that, you might be able to get a cheaper car loan. Oh, or a faster car loan. Oh, okay, yeah, then I would. So it certainly changes behavior and perspective when they see they're going to get value from sharing their information. So the risk profile in their mind shifts, and when the risk profile in their mind shifts, they're more open to being educated about what the opportunities are and to understand.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. I think with the sort of the regulatory overlay and some of the privacy overlay, that can have quite a warm fuzzy feeling for a consumer to recognise that sort of government brand and an overlay on it, and then the education within the process is easier.
Sure. I mean, when you use your credit card online today, part of the thing that goes on in the back of my mind anyway is, well, if this gets compromised, I have the backup of being able to report that to my credit card provider, and I won't be liable for the credit card transactions as long as I maintain compliance with their terms and conditions. We need that sort of a model in New Zealand, so I as a consumer will be willing to share my information and have confidence and trust that if things go wrong, I have a way of getting that dealt to.
I can see the exposure draft is going to have a lot of liability conversations going on next year.
It's risk and liability, yeah. That's primarily what the legislation is for.
Very good. Terese, any thoughts on inclusion?
Not so much inclusion. I most probably just want to do an overarching thought about the opportunity for New Zealand. So I'm hugely excited of the work that the industry has done to date. And the unique thing that the industry here, I believe, has already shown that we've learned is that we have actually worked together with the deep expertise right across the ecosystem to bring standards and processes and customer thoughts and use cases to mind for the market. So it hasn't been done by people that don't understand the depth of knowledge you need to understand and what is a complex transaction. It's been done by people that deeply understand that. And 100,000 hours, just shows the effort that needs to go on. And I'm sure we'll most probably spend another couple of 100,000 hours before we finish this journey. And it will be an ongoing journey. I think what's stopped the industry from making more progress to date is those really sticky things around liability, risk and accreditation. So because you're collaborating, we also, as Russell pointed out yesterday, for those that saw Russell, we also start reaching into some regulatory issues about competition working together. And so that's where today's announcement with the Minister about getting some regulation in there is actually going to be really useful. So right sizing, I believe we should right size, and I think the opportunity for New Zealand, and it's for the regulators and for the industry, is to actually get the best of both worlds, and no other jurisdiction has done that to date. So I'm really excited by where we're at.
Josh, thoughts on, I guess, what we've done to date in API Centre and what can be leveraged? Any sort of thoughts for how that will help the growth?
Yeah, so I guess there has been this question about what's going to happen to all the work that has been done in the API Centre when CDR comes along. And obviously the people that have done the work are wanting it to be used in CDR so that we don't have to throw away all the work that's been done. And I agree with that. I think we should use the work that has been done in the API Centre as a starting point for consumer data rights as it applies in the banking sector. And I think we should also look to leverage all of the knowledge that has been built up by people that have been participating in the system. I do think that CDR, building off Terese's point, helps in a couple of ways. One is that it will give deadlines. And this is something that is very hard to do as an industry, but it is very easy for government to do. So that will help to set milestones for when certain standards have to be met by API providers. The second thing it will do is take away the complexities of interacting with each data holder. So we've talked on this panel about bilateral agreements, and the current state is that anyone that wants to use APIs has to go and negotiate a bilateral agreement with each bank. They'll all have different requirements, takes a long time, and is a lot of wasted time. The CDR regulation will have some sort of centralized accreditation process so that for anyone looking to participate in the system, you do it once and then you get access on the basis of that accreditation. So those are two things that are just inherently hard for an industry group to do, but they will get a real push along by the regulation. So those are the key details that we are looking to see in CDR.
Yeah. So there's a lot of technical reuse that's available, a lot of the work that's in there, but some of those overlays, the legal and the sort of the framework things that can sit there with accreditation and all that sort of stuff can sort of get elevated into the regulation to get adopted and therefore accelerate. So,
yep.
Tina, thoughts?
Well, I mean, what they said. I mean, that's the comment about right sizing, right, is that we don't want to put regulation in place where we've been successful and made progress at the API Centre. Where we want to see regulation is where we haven't been successful. And those are the areas, the primary areas we're talking about, where we run up against the Commerce Act and we can't do a standard bilateral template, or we can't do a standard accreditation for third parties. So if the CDR legislation solves those problems for us and is small and we can bring it in quickly, I think that's a win for New Zealand. If we try and build out legislation that's deep and wide, that solves all the world's problems, then I suspect that we won't see it for many years, and that's not going to help open banking at all.
Yeah, I think that one of the things being industry-led is not only do we get great technical expertise and customer kind of a breadth of views around how we do deal with customers, but we also get a really effective, efficient and innovative standards that are fit for purpose for people that are going to bring products to market. So that depth of knowledge in the working groups that actually brings all these standards to life. And I would say, I would like to think, and it's a step further, is not only that we pick up the work we've done, is that the industry can actually continue to build it on behalf, and that we adopt a model where we continue to be industry-led.
With a customer advocate, perhaps.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
And Jody, I guess from a bank perspective, regulation and and have a very different meaning. So there's a lot of different implications from your perspective, I'd imagine.
There is. I'd probably veer away from that question and probably come back to, I guess, the opportunity that we've got, and that unique opportunity, because, I appreciate that at the moment from a third-party perspective, bilateral for each bank. But what that has meant is that we've actually now started to build that type of capability and relationships in the ecosystem. And so, any look overseas, any of those jurisdictions, they are like the models, they are hard to get right? And you said Josh talked about, and so assuming we get everything right, it's great. But if we want to extend beyond that, or innovate differently on that, or work, because if you think about working with partners, create value, and so some of that will always fit in standards, and some might just need to go further than that. In the UK at the moment, they've got on to, you talked about enduring payment consent, but it is a standard, but it doesn't go so far that it's moving into commercial conversations. And so they're in a position where it's like, how do we take all this stuff we've done in regulatory environment and now start to actually work together to create stuff outside of that? Whereas we're actually in the opposite kind of direction. But equally, it means we've got these opportunities, I guess, to continue to innovate. We're going to have a regulatory model, and we're going to have still an opportunity to work together to create areas of value that may be extending or leveraging and all those sorts of things. And I see that as really valuable. So, if that helps answer the question slightly.
Beautiful. So we do have a question, but maybe before I ask Jonathan's question, I think it's interesting. So MBIE was talking not only about the consultation for the beginning of the year, but also talked a little bit around the structure, so the role of the Commerce Commission from a compliance and enforcement, a sort of statutory officer doing the data standards, a Privacy Commission human rights review for looking at redress against complaints, and then a compliance and enforcement toolkit, of which had some teeth. So with that as a bit of context, so Jonathan asked a question around what steps can the industry take for this not to become a honeypot for bad actors? E.g. what happened to Optus and Medibank in Australia. I don't know if anyone wants to take that one. I'll open that up to the panel.
I'm happy to take. This is all the design considerations around an ecosystem. And I talk a lot about sustainable, because it's not about fastest. Because fastest that isn't sustainable, at some point, you're going to have some kind of exposure event like this, and the trust is lost. So I think, I guess, I've seen and been really pleased with the considerations of how do we build this sustainability, and what's the right level of security that we have to have? How does consent work? And all these really big questions. And then you have to balance that with, if we go too hard on this, we're actually going to limit innovation, but if we go too soft, you actually expose them to risk. And so this is part of that really challenging conversation. But I think that this has been top of mind in, I think, every part of the development around making sure that customers are at the centre, and that they have recourse if things go wrong, and how do they know where to go to help, and all those sorts of things. So, keen to hear any other views.
No, I don't disagree. I guess some other fuel to add to that is that we are building our standards based on best practice industry standards that are secure, and using financial grade API standards that are international. So we're not making this up. We're using standards that already exist that are highly secure for financial transactions, and we're just building on those and narrowing the surface area for attack, so that hopefully we're delivering the best of both worlds. But it is it is what it is at the moment, and the banks have the API providers have a requirement to be secure, and the third parties have a requirement to be secure and to do their best to keep the ecosystem secure on top of all of those.
And on top of that, like those two breaches that got mentioned, I mean, that had nothing to do with the way that they collected that data, right? So whether that happened through open banking or some other method of collection is kind of irrelevant in my mind. And what Tina's talking about is we are looking to upgrade the way that you authenticate and authorize your data to be shared. And that's what the major upgrade of open banking, regulated open banking is. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do. It won't remove those risks around data breaches and the potential for customers to suffer loss as a result of that. So at the end of the day, even when we've got regulated open banking mature in New Zealand, consumers will have to decide, do I trust this party that wants to collect my data? And yeah, I don't think that's going away anytime soon.
It's interesting. I'm not aware of any breach in a open banking, be it a payments open banking context or data open banking payments. And to your point, I think FAPI and MTLS and OAuth2 and Exit, all these standards that are, when they're baked into the standards or the legislation, actually provide some of those protections. And certainly, privacy, the privacy aspects of how much data you're allowed to collect and how you can store it, they're all kind of a series of protections. So arguably, could argue it's driving more protections and securities than other means of data sharing. So got one other question. I think we've just about got time for a sort of quick response in terms of a one bank product that a current bank consumer could avail of themselves of that uses open banking APIs. So I think Phil mentioned once, but I don't know if there's a top of mind that anyone wants to do in terms of what a product could be that uses open banking data.
I'll throw one out there because I'm big on sustainability. If I were able to take my financial transactions and provide that to a company or an app that could provide me more sustainable alternatives to where I'm shopping and what I'm buying, I would love to do that because I don't know enough, and it's very difficult to get information about if I buy from this vendor, what is their supply chain look like? Are they really sustainable and green? And to be able to combine those two together and give me information that helps me make better choices, I would love that.
One quick one from me. I'd just like someone to help me manage all the school fees requests that I keep getting for like $5, $10, $15, and across 3 children is very difficult to manage. So, yeah.
Conversation going on there. Yeah, we've got 31 app customers that are in market and doing a whole range of different things. And so I'd almost broaden out that prompt to say, look, another point on right-sizing the regulation is we have line of sight on some apps that we know we want to get built in New Zealand because we see them in other markets or we know that they would work in New Zealand. But I think what's really exciting is that this infrastructure enables stuff to be built that we haven't thought of yet. It's almost like when the internet came about, you can't predict all the things that are going to get built. And even we've only had a few years operating in New Zealand, and we have had use cases come about that we certainly did not have in mind when we decided to open up this infrastructure. So to me, that's the most exciting thing. There's stuff that we know wants to be built in New Zealand, and there's stuff that we just have no idea how to predict.
Amazing, yeah, fantastic.
I think, playing on that, I attended a hackathon a couple of years ago, and the apps that came up, one person was combining Google Voice with open banking data and with open banking, and payment initiation to do a digital swear jar, right? So you could put a digital swear jar in your house, and if the kids swore, 25 cents got taken out of their bank account and donated to a charity. And I thought that was a very innovative idea. Would have never occurred to me at all. That's just something somebody's idea on the day. I can't imagine what we'll see when it's really unlocked.
Beautiful, yeah, and multi-industry in time. So thank you very much, panel. It's been a fantastic discussion, and back to you, Phil.
Okay, thanks very much. So just to sort of quickly summarise in the interest of time, but yeah, I think we're hearing from the panel now there's a great opportunity for CDR to accelerate open banking with the right size regulation, and we've had a lot of industry experts to date, and we hope to build on that and continue with the industry experts. I'd like to say thanks very much to the panel for really insightful thoughts, and again thank you to EY for sponsoring our session. Thank you for those who have joined us. I hope you found it really insightful, as I did. Just please also note that the session has been recorded, so we'll let you know when that's available to view later on. And the next session coming up is reframing of our real-time future payments for the next generation. So that's session 5, and we hope to see you there. Thanks very much for joining us.